Tonight's topic is looking at transition programs, and the topics that we're going to include is why are they even needed, and what is the federal transition mandate about, as well as maybe a model that you can look to and practices that you can use in your own classrooms. And then finally we'll wrap up with a tutorial on adult service programs. So to get our minds oriented around why it matters, let's take a look at this trailer for a documentary you can find through HBO, but it's currently on YouTube, Netflix. It's called Monica and David. So I'm going to just pull that up really quickly and we'll just watch it through here.
And have one more wonderful thing in your life, what would it be?
Same thing, Monica.
When they met, he fell madly in love with Monica. That's my girl, and someday I'm gonna marry her. And he would say that.
What more of a natural reaction than two people who love each other and want to be together? She is the light of my life, and I firmly believe that that's my life's work.
This is my day. It's my life. To be with my husband forever.
What do you think? You think it's ready? You guys make a great team.
We are brothers.
Hysterical.
People with developmental disabilities have needs and desires. They are very much like everyone else.
I wish I had a baby like you. It's up to us, it's not up to them.
Right.
I wouldn't want him to have to associate with society.
She's fighting with me.
As parents, because we want to protect them so much, we are typically the first ones who treat them poorly by subconsciously denying them their rights to have a normal life.
Yeah, I get it.
Nice to meet you, David.
I'm Monica.
Monica, nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet him.
Monica, David, you want to work.
Yes.
Once that person starts working and earning their own money, you see such a difference.
Sure.
Ultimately, what it is, it's about independence. Independence with the support.
Right. Many more.
Honey, if you
So I love that trailer for a lot of reasons. Specifically, some things that stand out to me is one, this is why transition programs exist. Individuals with disabilities have their own plans, and we often immortalize them into children, and we should not do that. They have desires and dreams and hopes. Monica and David are in training programs for work. They want a family. They want privacy. They want all of those things. And that's why the cooking matters, and that's why some of those functional skills matter, but also looking at long-term employability and financial resources. There's one comment in there that every time I listen to it, it kind of strikes me again, and that is that as their advocates, sometimes we become the barrier that they have to get over to succeed. And I've thought a lot about that, and I think that's often true, and it's unfortunate, and I think we have to keep in mind daily, on a daily basis, I don't want to be a barrier to the students I'm working with. So why do those barriers exist? The most common reasons are money, time, creativity, cultural biases. In fact, if you get on the comments about the movie trailer, people are just pretty hateful. They say some really ignorant things about people with disabilities. But the typical suspects are very common. We might not have a class budget to go out and ride public transportation. Time-wise, we've got a lot on our plates. We're trying to get a lot of IEP goals done and meet a lot of needs. And then sometimes it really does boil down to creativity. We're not able to think outside the box that we've been put in. But the most detrimental, and this is where I like what the trailer highlights, is that sometimes we're the ones standing in the way. We think we know what's best. We don't like it when our students tell us, no, I don't want that, or I'm not interested in that, or we think they have pie in the sky dreams when they have things that we think they might not be able to obtain. And if we really sat down to think about it, I think it would floor us how often we become the barrier that our students have to get over. So then comes the need for transition services. I want you to look at these numbers because they're terrifying. For a student with learning disability, right? So many of you are mild moderate, but we're looking at almost half of them are unemployed, and they're making around $16,000 a year. These are students with learning disabilities. Those that have average intelligence to above average intelligence are still significantly underemployed. And when you look at students with intellectual disabilities, only about a third of them get jobs, and their average income is about $5,000 a year. Now, if you really think about $5,000 and what that buys you, it does not buy you reliable transportation, it does not buy you reasonable health care, it does not buy you clothes that would be appropriate for work, it doesn't buy you leisure items, it really is buying basically food for the year. And when we talk about food and social justice ideas around food, we're talking about a lot of fast food, a lot of cheap, unhealthy kinds of food. So this is really problematic, and this is one of the reasons that transition services are so important. And then this idea that even when working full-time, adults with disabilities earn below the poverty line. That's pretty terrifying, having a full-time job and being below the poverty line. So another problem that is just really disheartening is that the majority of people with disabilities do not live independently, and this is often not by their choice. Whether they've been grouped into group homes, that's the only way that they can get services is by going in. They don't get to pick their roommates, they don't have a lot of say in how they live, or they're kind of forced to be dependent on their parents, and then the state could, or the parents might even introduce guardianship issues into the relationship that they don't quite understand brings and involves the state. The other piece is that people are often more isolated in the community when they have disabilities. They don't access the same leisure activities, maybe because of the cost, maybe because of transportation, maybe because of acceptance. And then also, as I mentioned, the healthcare is a big problem. A lot of our students with disabilities have increased medical health needs, and yet they have the least amount of money and access to it. And then finally, this idea that the perceptions of people with disabilities about the quality of their lives is lower than those that don't have disability. So they're recognizing that they don't get to go maybe on the vacations that they'd want to, or they don't get to make the decisions that they want to, and that there's people in power over them all the time. So IDEA 2004 actually put in some really strong transition mandates. The first being that everything has to be coordinated. There shouldn't be these random pieces that don't fit back together, but it should transition a student into their community life. Now, going back to what we talked about for last week with the planning and the interview that you're going to be doing with a student, that really helps us address that we've taken into consideration what the community life looks like, and we've made a plan to set up a coordinated plan for activities. Now, the second one is that we also need to involve community service agencies. So that could be adult services, that could be workforce services, it could be medical professional, but that it takes, to coin a phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. The idea here is that it takes a lot of service providers to ensure the success of an individual with disability, that they have access to what they need outside of the school system. And finally, we've got to ensure that there is a plan that allows a student to actually meet their own post-school goals. So this is where your assignment this semester comes from, is it begins with that interview and then moves into you creating an IEP, the goals and objectives, and finally instructional programs to ensure that a student gets that bridge to where they want to go. Now, an amendment to transition services, this emphasizes the student's needs. So this isn't just that my school could do this or that all of my students are doing this, but that the student prefers this, they have strengths in it, they're interested in it. Also, that it's a results-oriented process, which means collecting data, right? You have to prove that that improvement is happening. And that we're looking at areas that are outside of school, including education, employment training, adult education, independent living, and community participation. And then finally, that it includes instruction and related services, community experiences, and the development and employment of other post-school adult learning objectives. So this idea behind this is that this is big picture planning. This is no longer, minute pieces of a curriculum. This is big. This is building puzzles to get students to realize that whole picture. So another piece that's really important is that by the time a student is 16, an IEP has to include post-secondary goals that are based on their age, transition assessments, and it should include employment, education, and even independent living skills. So that doesn't mean we start thinking about it when the kid turns 17 or 16. It means that it is in place by the time they're 16. So this usually means that we're exploring this at age 14. We are writing it into the IEP at 15 so that it's a guiding element by the time that the student turns 16. In addition to it, we have to start notifying about the age of majority at least 1 year before they turn 18. So at that point in time, that's a conversation that can go terribly bad if it's not well planned. It's one thing to tell a parent, hey, your student in 1 year turns 18 and therefore they are able to make any decision they want to. Because what that pushes parents to do is go out and get guardianship and hire a lawyer to take away basic rights from their child. They don't mean to do it, they're not intending to do it in that way, but it really is more problematic than we give credence to. We'll be talking about guardianship issues later. So the better way to have a discussion with the age of majority is to talk still with the parents. What concerns do you have about your student being able to make their own decisions? And potentially looking into more of a supported role rather than an all-over guardianship role. Another piece that comes out of these transition mandates is that we have to do a summary of performance, an SOP form usually. So as students are exiting or graduating school due to their age or their skill level, there should be a document actually that student now can take to college or to voc rehab that states where they are currently with their functional performances and what else is still needed to meet those long-term goals. So there's been some interesting research on how compliant teachers have been with IDEA. Now, Clareback, Williams, and O'Leary 2001 examined IEPs across, we have 60, that should be 50. We added an extra bunch of states, I guess. But they looked at that, and what they found is that a third of these IEPs did not include students with disabilities. So, this might mean that they're not even part of the conversation about their own lives. And then half of the IEPs did not even have a statement of any sort of transition services. That's mandated in law, so how half of them are missing that becomes questionable. Now, we move forward a couple of years, and these researchers examined almost 400 IEPs in one specific state. And what they looked at is that in more than half, transition requirements are missing or inadequate on the IEP. And then also, it was almost non-existent for them to actually find recommended transition practices. So what this is saying is we have no roadmap. Monica and David are left out on their own to, that life that they want because we're not writing these goals well. So let's talk about some things that we should do instead. Okay, now I've said this in other classes, perhaps you realize, we know everything we need to know, and we have since the 80s. There was a huge burst of research in the 80s. We know what we need to do, and for some reason we tend to ignore that. We think it's dated or whatever. There's new research that comes out all the time and validating it. But we've known what we need to know for over 30 years now. So let's take a look at how we should be looking at secondary education, transition planning, and employment. So back in the day, we really thought about transition in a way that included, all areas of adult life, like employment, independent living, all of those things. The transition process was conceptualized as a bridge. Now, this idea was planning, versus changing the education system. So how do we get across that bridge into community life? We do it through transition programming. Now, this is where we change a little bit, is we actually look that we're building pieces beginning in middle school, and I would even argue earlier than that, all the way through community living. So, for example, in secondary education, we should be enabling somebody to pick up skills so that they can work and live after school. We should establish the necessary supports that will help them become successful. So we should never dump a student out of the school system without even having those supports identified, yet that happens all the time. Now, some assumptions about secondary program is, in order to do this, is we've got to realign the curriculum to either be cumulative or, to really look at that social adjustment piece. And then also we've got to structure it to accommodate the developmental differences of all the students we work with. So here's a breakdown. If you look at age-wise, what a kid should be doing in middle school, high school, and post-high, you can see here that we should be focused on social relationships, developing the capacity to affect lives, and assuming more and more control over all of our daily activities. We can be doing that in junior high. We don't need to wait until a kid is 20 years old before we have these conversations. We should be having them at 12 and 14 years old. Once a kid gets into high school, we're really looking at building social relationships, alternatives within career paths. A lot of times a student will have an idea like, I want to be a pilot, and they might have things that even trying not to be that barrier in their road, their vision isn't in a place, and their plan is not to attend post-secondary training. So finding out why they like the idea of being a pilot might actually gravitate towards, they like watching planes come and go. Well, actually, as a pilot, you'll see some of that, but the job is broader than that. Maybe something in the airport meets the need and interest that they have in a better way. So then we also want to look at leisure interests. The majority of our time is not spent working. We spend a lot of time doing things, and if students aren't taught how to use leisure time in a way they're interested in, they end up gravitating towards TV. And although many of us spend too much time at the TV, that's usually by choice. We can choose to do other things and learn other things. So we want to teach students how to earn monies and spend money so that they can go access that. And that includes transportation and all of that. So by the time a student gets to post-high, we really should be confirming what their personal choices are. We should have a really good sense of where they're going and what they're interested in. And we want to establish professional goals in their identity. So we should have worked through the social skills issues and the basic, grooming kinds of things. And now we're really looking at inclusion in an adult community. So these are actually best served as satellite programs outside of a high school, where the kids aren't reporting to school when they're 22 years old. They're in the community, and our school staff is out there supporting them in their jobs and leisure activities. So here's some recommendations. Is for transition planning, we should really look at coordinating school and community services. We both have pots of money, we both have skilled people, but this should lead to employment or a means to making a meaningful contribution. So even if a student has a different idea, you want to spend your time doing something meaningful during the day. That does not mean we volunteer at Walmart. It means that a student may be more interested in volunteering their time out in, a community garden than they're interested in working at Burger King. And so we want to be able to support that, but always keep in mind that money does make a difference in individuals' life and access to health care. We also need to be thinking about safe places to live that are comfortable, maintaining social networks, and of course, increasing independence. So with the community services, we want to empower the individual, and we want to provide the supports that are necessary for them to be involved not in a few things in the community, but the full community experience like the rest of us have access to. And this idea of lifelong learning. Just because a student turns 22 doesn't mean there's never going to be an opportunity to learn a new job or skill. We want the students to start realizing you can take on new things. How do you access adult community programs? College should be on the agenda for many, many students. I mentioned Aggie's Elevated last week. It's a wonderful program, and there should be more of these that recognize that students with disabilities, just like any other teenager without disabilities, continue on that education path, and it increases the amount that they'll earn, the friends that they'll have, their interests, all of those things. So we're going to take a look at each of these, but here's some recommended practices. This is the big one. Self-determination, right? Social competence. We don't want people out making social errors and grooming issues, right? Formal and informal supports. So this can be friends and family and church members and all of those, as well as the school and, interagencies. The functional curriculum and instruction, so that's where you get cooking and money skills and things like that. In addition, we also want to allow for the opportunities to prepare for work and for school after school. And we want to bring in the family. So often people have a difficult time between 1 and 6, this idea of becoming your own person, self-determination, and also having family involvement. And the truth is that students should have both. A lot of college students at this point in time are relying heavily on their parents to answer questions for them, help them learn how to do new things. This is a very, very developmentally appropriate thing to do. And then finally, we've got to invite those service providers in and get them connected, because if we drop the ball doesn't just get picked up and run with. It stays dropped in most situations because people don't have the experience that we should, and they're not always able to make that bridge for themselves, and that's our job. So promoting self-determination, this is that whole idea of everything should be focused on my values and beliefs, goals, self-awareness, long-term quality of life outcomes. We want to teach choice, self-management, so the idea to control our temper or organize our time, and then advocacy skills, standing up for ourselves if somebody is violating our rights. And then also organizing programs that require support and gaining knowledge and skill sets in these areas. Social competence is this idea of interpersonal skills and social skills, and then embedding these skill instructions into the entire curriculum. There's no reason we shouldn't be working on social competence from the time kids are in preschool. And then finally, looking at friendships and social networks. We don't want people with disabilities to be lonely simply for the fact that we have not helped them establish real friendships and social networks. So this idea of formal and informal, let's break those up. Formal is the agencies and organizations. The idea is to supplement and not supplant, so that we have natural levels. So we don't need an organization to do more for a student than they actually need, right? So just support. Informal is really relying on typical people for inclusion and interests, and we want to rely on that more than specialized services. So for example, many of us, when we're having a bad day, we call a friend or a family member to talk through things. But on the rare occasion where that's not enough, we do also have access to a qualified professional in a psychiatrist, psychologist. So that would be the difference between formal and informal supports. But the majority of our lives are really focused around informal supports. But for some reason, with people with disability, we try to focus their world around formal supports. And not only is it expensive and time consuming, but it's not one that provides a lot of love and care that the informal supports would do. So we want to do that because that's what humanity is about. Okay, so functional curriculum is, of course, figuring out that balance we talked about last week is how much academic and how much vocation. We want to look at their real life contexts, and we want them to demonstrate mastery and be able to apply these skills in those contexts. So this means we've got to get out of the classroom. As the students are getting older, it's one thing to simulate a market, it's another to actually shop from your home shopping list for a meal that you're going to cook for. We want to push outside of the classroom into paid work, community-based instruction, transportation, all of those things. Now, obviously, this is one area that we are incredibly hampered with creativity due to time and money. But at the same time, there's a ton of ways around it if you can pull yourself back. For example, one of the things I used to do, we had buses, but even without buses, there's tracks and there's small community shops. But I would have the students bring in money and their grocery list from home, and we collaborated with the family to make it a reasonable amount because I didn't have money to have them go out and buy things in my class budget. And then even if I did, they'd most likely be buying candy or some sort of treat for themselves, when in reality, their reality is that they're going to be pressed for cash. And I don't want them eating a box of Little Debbie's because they've learned how to buy that for a couple of bucks when they could have bought something that actually made a meal. So working with the family to see what's reasonable based on what their life actually looks like, as well as constraints that we might have in the classroom. We've got to just be creative. Now, preparation for career or education. So we want to begin with, what do all of these positions do? So maybe I have a student that identifies they want to be a vet. Well, let's go find out what a vet does. But we should be doing that at 14 years old, reading about a vet, writing our report, or doing something like that. That should be at 14, not at 20. So as they get older, work-based learning opportunities. So they're working in a clinic, working with the animals, getting experience. And by the time they're in those post-high school settings, they should have a job at that clinic so that we can support them in the areas that they still have. Now, that's obviously a clean-cut example. More likely what it is you have a student that tells you they want to work at a daycare. So you find out everything there is about a daycare, and they are like, but I'm not changing poopy diapers, and I don't like feeding kids. Okay, well, let's think of other things. What else? Why do you like that job? I love snack time, and I love being outside. Okay, have you thought of these other jobs as well? So thinking through helping people identify what they're interested in. We do the same thing with other high school students as well. So post-secondary education, we should have students go out and explore college campuses, see what that's like, identify what kinds of adaptations or accommodations and learning strategies they might need, teaching time management and problem-solving skills. This is actually a very common issue for many incoming freshmen. And then establish supports and study routines so that they have the skill set. They're used to going home and doing homework. They're used to having to plan out for a couple different people, not just one main teacher. So there's lots of things we can do to prepare them. I'll tell you the best way we can do the post-secondary education is by having them in inclusive classrooms. They're going to pick this up, and then it will be taught explicitly to them. Family involvement, as I mentioned, is on one hand, we need the families to communicate a lot with us, and we also need to pass along information. they're not experts. In a lot of ways, they've had to become experts for their children, but the transition process just kind of blows it all out of the water. It's new, it's overwhelming, it's scary. We have the opportunity to provide a lot of information about things like how the planning process works. What are those services and organizations that we should partner with? And also, how do we evaluate what's effective and what's quality? We also want parents to develop realistic aspirations. So on one hand, you might have a parent that says, oh, no, that's nothing my student can do, so they become a barrier for that student. Or on the flip side, they might not be realistic as to where a student is and how hard it is for them to, make 3 years of progress in 2 months before graduation. So we want to just have a lot of conversations with the family, recognize what the student wants and how we're going to get there and what might be pathways to that. It might not all happen by graduation or exiting, but at the same time it can happen. But that should be explicitly worked through with the family. And then we also want the family to think about who their networks are, who are they connected to. The students that I've worked with that have had the most success in maintaining jobs for years and years are those that have worked through natural social networks to get jobs, because you have somebody on the other end who is really invested in doing the right thing and being part of that family's experience. So interagency support is looking at sharing information, coordinating at the agency and student level. So sometimes they'll tell you, we're not picking up a kid till 21, so you do your thing, we'll do our thing. That's really not an effective way to operate, and really great counselors know that already, and they are willing, interested, and eager to come to our back to school nights or those parent training sessions that we develop, so that they can get the information out. They know that they can't just pick up a student after they've left school, because too much time passes before that they can begin picking up and understanding and evaluating where students are and what they need. Let's take a look really quickly at a tutorial of adult service programs. Now, I have previously had a guest speaker come in and talk on this topic. I will probably have you guys watch one of the seminars he does instead towards the end of the semester, but I want to get into some other important markers on, again, guardianship and some of those civil rights issues that are being violated right now in the adult world of people with disabilities. Okay, so here's your tutorial. The basic characteristics of community service is that it's based on the medical model. So it's designed to cure the disability. As educators, we see this very, very differently, but adult services are more medical model. So their services are structured on a continuum, meaning more or less competent in all these areas, right? And an individual accesses less restrictive settings as their competence increases. So some of our students with multiple disabilities are automatically placed in services that are segregated, isolated, only for people with disabilities, and they may not ever be able to work their ways out of them. Now, these are very common characteristics. It doesn't mean they're all this way, but these are common. And finally, agencies contract with providers versus providing support to individuals. So you just kind of have these random workers working with adults, and sometimes that can be problematic if those workers are changing all of the time, if those workers are abusive, they're basically subcontracting out that work. So in some ways, nobody's really held responsible for lack of progress or problems. Now, there's a difference between entitlement and eligibility programs. So if you listen to the news at all, and the baby boomer generation talks a lot about these, but it applies to disability services as well. So entitlement programs mean that individuals who meet the eligibility requirement, they must be provided service. So for example, this is our law, IDEA, or Medicaid. So if they meet that, they get it. Okay, that's entitlement. They're entitled to those things. Now, eligibility is quite different, and what this means is that an individual is provided service if they meet the criteria and the service is available. So this means that not everybody can have employment and residential help. This is problematic in my mind, right? This is a social justice issue. So a community that doesn't have those things, it means, you know, I'm sorry you're eligible, but we don't have it, right? So they're vastly different. And you can see one is, you know, the basics that are really, really important also, but the other one is kind of what makes the difference in quality of life. Now, another thing to understand is where money comes into this. The only entitlement program for adults are mandated with SSA and its amendment. There's 3 basic programs: Medicaid, which includes SSI, and you know, this includes if an individual needs to be hospitalized, for example. But one of the reasons that institutions and nursing homes are such a big option, and a terrible option, but a big option, is because it's paid for. So there's a lot of pushback on the government that give us the money that you would have spent in an institution and nursing home and let me decide how to support myself. So with Medicare, this is short-term hospitalizations, going to the doctor, some supplies and equipment. And then we have SSI, Supplemental Security Income. This is basic economic support, and this assumes an individual cannot work. Now, this is important because what we're saying is in order to get SSI money, it means you're not working. So this becomes problematic when you have a student you're working with that has issues that won't let them earn a livable wage, but they can work. And we know work has more benefit than just money. It's social, it's skill building, it keeps you sharp, it gets you up and out. If somebody's making above a certain amount, they're not going to be able to get SSI either. So it dooms them to poverty. So it's really problematic. Employment programs under eligibility is that we should be providing opportunities for people with disabilities to obtain paid employment. And the idea behind this is to reduce dependence on income supports. So if you have a student that's working a full-time job, getting benefits, paying taxes, that is so much better for the government than for them to say, I'm sorry, you can't work at all, we'll pay you to stay home, basically. And that's how it's run. I know it's intended very differently, but as somebody who's worked in these programs, that is how it works. A lot of parents are really skittish about letting their students accept jobs because their SSI was so hard to even get in the first place. They really don't want to jeopardize that. So with this, we're looking at the continuum of services, very similar to how a school operates, from inclusive education to cluster units to segregated special schools. The same thing is applied to employment programs. So if you start with the most exclusionary, those are day treatment. So these are you know, centers that are set up for constant all-day you know, care of an individual. Then you get the work activity center. So those are supposed to be therapeutic. They're supposed to be learning things there. But honestly, it's pretty hard to justify skills building in these work activity centers oftentimes. And then you get up into the sheltered workshop where there's prerequisites to doing things. But the sheltered workshops, the idea behind them is they're preparing people for employment. But you know, it's a very, very small skill set, and with that skill set, you're still not interacting necessarily with people without disability. And then finally, you get into transitional employment services. This is very short-term training. I'm going to send a person out with you to Smith's for a limited number of hours, and if you can work that job after, great. If not, you're on your own. So unfortunately, this is the continuum of service. So if you're in a school that's waiting for vocational rehab to come and save the day, and you're not working on skills, these are your options. You know, do you want them in all day, part day, earning a pens, or kind of rolling the dice and hoping they get trained in a very short amount of time, what you couldn't do across 4 years. So these are the government programs that are available through adult services. Now, in the 80s, an alternative came through called supported employment. The idea behind this is that rather than that continuum that's kind of dark and depressing, is that we just start. Let's put a person in a paid job and provide the support they need to ensure success. We start getting into things like job carving, which means maybe a student can't do the whole job, but could they do part of it? Could you take some from everybody's plate and create a job? There was a great example of an individual who loved doing office kinds of work, collating, organizing, mailing, all of that kind of stuff. Loved it. And realistically, because of the physical limitation, could not go work like mainstream office work or something like that. And plus, really could only work about 2 to 3 hours a day before getting really, really tired out and had a pretty serious physical disability. So this school set up a job coach to go out and job carve and worked with a local real estate agency and cultivated a job, found out that all of the real estate agents hated doing their own materials. They hated packaging. They can make more money not doing that. And they created this job saying, well, what's it worth to you? Is it worth to each one of you $2 an hour for someone to come in for 3 hours, 4 times a week and put these packets together? And they said, oh my gosh, absolutely. I can go make, quadruple that by being out in the field. So they carved out a job doing the pieces of work that this student loved doing, was able to manage the time restraints that the student had and contributed and benefited. And that's been a long-standing partnership and worked really, really well. So same thing with residential programs is when we're talking eligibility, right? That means the housing has to exist. And so oftentimes people are put on this wait list. Now, this provides home living alternatives for people with disability and provides training for independent living. So these are nice ways of saying that, if you need help with living, you're going to come live with a bunch of strangers in a strange place that might not even be in the local neighborhood that you grew up in or that you want to live in. So that's that's if you're lucky enough to get it. This again is based on a continuum of services from, nursing homes to group homes and, this active treatment are kind of a middle ground between group homes and nursing homes, and then supervised living. That's short-term training to go out and do your own. So it's no wonder so many of our former students or even current students end up in a group home. That's the continuum of services. But again, we have alternatives to these called supported living. And this is where we help an individual find a home that meets their needs, provide opportunities for them to learn what they need to do to cook the food they need to cook, to clean the things they need to clean, see what money situations they have, if they need to hire out services they can, and heaven forbid, pick the roommates they get to have, or none. That sometimes in group homes, we force people into relationships with others that are detrimental. They don't get along, and it's detrimental to all of them involved. They don't get to pick. Supported living is vastly different. Now, another issue with this is that there's a conflict between funding, right? Most of the funding goes towards institutional programs than community-based alternatives. So this has become a big issue. Barack Obama, as a governor or as a legislator, was trying to push through community access so that, again, that money is going directly to the person and then the person is spending it how they want to. It did not pass, unfortunately, because it's easier to send it to a building and know that everybody's going to be taken care of. So there's a lack of entitlement to employment and residential services. So that's a problem. And finally, we see the supported employment and supported living as an add-on rather than an alternative to the curriculum. So when we move out of the academic arena and we start looking at how do you get people ready to work and live, those are kind of, again, seen functionally as add-ons. So With that, I want you to look at the tasks that you have for this week. I want you to think again, this is what you'll be doing in your case study, is starting to identify some of these major issues that we have. And when you see pictures like this and you see the documentary, you understand that everything we're doing to address those problems and the way that we're structuring from elementary to middle to high school to post-high, they matter. They matter a lot. In fact, if you watch the whole documentary on Monica and David, there's some uncomfortable pieces that, as beautiful as the story is, it highlights that there were still needs there that didn't get met, and could so in the future, but sometimes it was the parents that actually became problematic and failed to treat these two as adults who were in a committed marriage instead of, her daughter and, a sleepover companion. So I want you to think about these things this week. Check out the to-do lists. Pretty soon we will be getting the placements in order so that you can go out and meet with your mentors and start identifying who your case study student will be. I'll be giving more information on how to complete your case study in probably next week or the week after. Usually when it's more appropriate is when you actually have the placement so it can stick. So for the time being, I want you to complete the materials and your reading guides. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great week.